Not allowing a child to use puberty blockers is simply just transphobic. It just is what it is.
Welcome to Surviving Wokeland with Ethan Quinn, a channel dedicated to exposing and explaining the ideology driving wokeness. Recently, President Joe Biden said that it was cruel not to transition children with gender dysphoria.
Transgender kids is a really harder thing. What's going on in Florida is, as my mother would say, close to sinful. I mean, it's just terrible what they're doing. It's not like, a kid wakes up one morning and says, I decided I want to become a man, or I want to become a woman, or I want to change.
They're kids, it's all phases. The dinosaur phase, the Hello Kitty phase. One day they want to be an astronaut, the next day you can't get them to leave their room. Gender fluid, kids are fluid about everything. If kids knew what they wanted to be at age 8, the world would be filled with cowboys and princesses.
I mean, what are they thinking about here? They're human beings. They love, they have feelings, they have inclinations that are, it just to me is, I don't know, it's cruel. And the way we do it is we make sure we pass legislation like we passed on same-sex marriage. You mess with that, you're breaking the law, and you're going to be held accountable.
I was 18 years old when I began to medically transition and started taking testosterone. I was 19 years old when I removed my breasts. I was 20 years old when I detransitioned.
Biden, nothing more than a puppet to his woke overlords, is repeating what has become a common woke talking point. The idea that anything less than unquestioning affirmation is bigotry. In my book, Ministry of Truth, I offer an alternative view. And you can decide for yourself if my view is cruel. Trans ideology claims to be about self-acceptance, but at the same time, it suggests that acceptance can only come after you make drastic modifications to yourself.
I wish that I would have addressed the doubts that I had about transitioning within myself to someone, whatever it would be, but I wish that I would not have just blindly accepted the affirming narrative that was pushed onto me.
Shouldn't we instead teach children to accept themselves just as they are, that they don't have to transition to become their real selves? Shouldn't we tell them that they can be happy immediately?
Obviously, transitioning did not treat my dysphoria.
What value is there in telling a little boy that he will only be truly happy once he becomes a woman? Especially when this is something that he can only do on a cosmetic level, and never on a biologically functional level. Suppose happiness is at the end of a transition, but that transition will, at best, only be partial. Doesn't it stand to reason that he can only ever achieve partial happiness?
And in all of that, my dysphoria wasn't alleviated. It wasn't healed. You want to know when my dysphoria went away? When I realized that I was a woman. That's when the confusion went away.
The problem is that gender dysphoria is increasing in children because woke propaganda is creating it.
Less than 1% of Americans born before 1946, that's Joe Biden's generation, identify that way. 2.6% of boomers do, 4.2% of Gen X, 10.5% of millennials, and 20.8% of Gen Z. Which means if we follow this trajectory, we will all be gay in 2054.
This is an artificially created emotional and psychological epidemic.
Sometimes two variables are so undeniably intertwined with one another that you cannot deny the cause and effect relationship between the two. Gender dysphoria cases more than doubling over the last 5 years is absolutely one of these cases. The above graph shows gender dysphoria cases by state. You can see in every single one of these states cases have at least doubled, if not tripled, over the last 5 years. Here's a graph coming out of insurance claims based on gender dysphoria diagnoses, increasing 122% over the last 5 years. Finally, we have the insurance claims for puberty blockers increasing by 120% over the last 5 years.
Children are programmed to believe their gender is mismatched because they are told so by everyone, from the media to their teachers, and even their parents.
Hey Wesley.
Yeah.
Are you a boy or a girl?
A boy and a girl.
What are your pronouns?
Him and she.
How do you know?
That's how I feel.
If you attend a small dinner party of typically very liberal upper-income Angelenos, it is not uncommon to hear parents who each have a trans kid having a conversation about that. What are the odds of that happening in Youngstown, Ohio? If this spike in trans children is all natural, why is it regional? Either Ohio is shaming them or California is creating them.
been so-called cis, is now demonized as boring and bigotry. Hence, children want to find a different identity to escape being labeled as cisgender.
If we can't admit that in certain enclaves there is some level of trendiness to the idea of being anything other than straight, then this is not a serious science-based discussion. It's a blow being struck in the culture wars using children as cannon fodder.
The second problem is that the medical community has adopted woke ideology and forsaken science.
I want to ask you about your gender identity. Are you comfortable having that conversation right now?
Sure.
All right. Would you say that you identify as a boy, girl, transgender, or non-binary, or maybe some other gender?
I love these simple questions from trolls who haven't cracked a textbook since middle school. The science is very clear. Sex is not binary. It's actually based on a very complicated interplay between genetics, the endocrine system, and the neuroendocrine system, and transgender people are real. Be mad about it.
Trans women should be legally treated as women. Tell me why you strongly disagree.
Because I'm a molecular geneticist.
Well, okay, so tell me what that, because I count on my fingers. I know nothing about genes.
Being male or being female is a developmental process. You can't go backwards. Okay. So you can't change your sex. Like, you cannot do that.
What they are now doing to children is experimentation, not medication.
That I was experiencing it with this gender ideology was that, well, I'm depressed because people are misgendering me, versus like what I really needed was my health taken care of.
Woke ideology will have us believe that the only kind response to gender dysphoria is affirmative care.
Not allowing a child to use puberty blockers is simply just transphobic. It just is what it is.
Immediately on my first appointment with a therapist, she immediately affirmed me as a transgender woman.
In other words, when children present with gender dysphoria, we must treat the symptoms, not the cause.
I lost my penis to affirming care. It's something that I never thought would happen to me.
Instead of treating the underlying emotional and psychological causes of gender dysphoria, doctors are irreversibly and irresponsibly treating the symptoms.
But my doctors took my non-binary identity more seriously than the health complications I got from the surgery.
If a child presents with gender dysphoria, doctors immediately put them on puberty blockers, followed by cross-sex hormones, and then surgery. At no point are they asking the most crucial question: what is causing this dysphoria?
In sixth grade, I had some trauma around being a woman, around like sexuality. It was really the trauma that started it, because then I started like identifying more with these boy anime characters. It wasn't until I got to college and I was introduced to like gender ideology that I heard what non-binary was. And I just really wanted an out for both of them, out, and sort of this escapism.
If a young girl has anorexia, treatment will involve finding out what is causing her body dysmorphia and helping her overcome it. The doctor does not just say, "You think you're fat? Let's do liposuction." However, doctors don't ask what the cause is, just cut off her breasts. If a young girl presents with gender dysphoria, it is just madness.
Through 2 Zoom sessions, approved of top surgery.
Woke propaganda does not tell children how destructive gender medicine is.
2.5 years after transitioning, I still deal with medical problems. And I wish I would have known this, and I wish that I would have been consciously made aware of this before transitioning.
There is very little science to back up the safety of puberty blockers, and already a lot of evidence that it is harmful.
Basically what it does is it floods the pituitary gland with the chemicals that it's already producing, which in turn causes it to shut down and pause puberty temporarily. When hormone blockers are removed, puberty resumes. The effects are currently understood to be 100% reversible.
It's only logical that if you mess with a child's physical development, it will have consequences. What is shocking is that so-called puberty blockers are, in fact, drugs like Lupron, once used to chemically castrate sex offenders. Just think about that for a moment.
There's no real reason not to. Puberty blockers just allows a child to kind of freeze, allows their look to freeze, to stay in place. It gives them more time, essentially, to decide whether they want to go further with any medical transition.
Because we're literally experimenting on children. Maybe that's why Sweden and Finland have stopped giving puberty blockers to kids, because we just don't know much about the long-term effects. Although common sense should tell you that when you reverse the course of raging hormones, there's going to be problems. We do know it hinders the development of bone density, which is kind of important if you like having a skeleton. Fertility and the ability to have an orgasm seem also to be affected. This isn't just a lifestyle decision, it's medical. Weighing trade-offs is not bigotry.
When I began to take testosterone, it completely wrecked my life. I started to feel a lot of anger that I never felt before. My psychological issues that I had got so much worse. You know, at the very least, at that point, I was a good student and I had a scholarship to school. And in that sense, my future was promising. But all of that was taken from me the moment that I started injecting. I couldn't have even a logical thought. My anxiety skyrocketed. I even remember early in that semester when I turned 18, having to go to the hospital 3 times in 1 week due to anxiety and due to stress. So I wish that I would have known and acknowledged that testosterone is a controlled substance for a reason.
In many cases, your body is permanently altered. Like in my case, you can't go fully back to the person you used to be. Taking artificial hormones is not the same as having natural hormone in you and having testicles to regulate your hormonal levels. Because testicles, gonads do play a large part in how hormones are regulated. Buying artificial hormone, putting it in yourself is just not the same, you know?
In my book Ministry of Truth, I go into more detail about how and why children are targeted by woke propaganda. I also explain the history and origins of gender theory and how children became the target. That is all I have for today. Please like and subscribe, and join me again tomorrow as we learn how to survive woke land together. Until then, this is Ethan Quinn saying, stay free.